My stepmom demanded I pay $800 rent, so I evicted her, her two lazy kids, and took back the 1.2-meter home my grandparents secretly left me. On day 13, a stranger knocked on my own front door and handed me a restraining order with my name on it, not Selena's, mine. I stood there in my work apron, coffee grounds still under my fingernails, staring at a document that claimed I had threatened a member of my own household. My hands didn't shake at first. They went numb, the way skin does right before you realize you've been cut. Then the paper trembled, and I had to set it down on the porch railing before I dropped it. "You've been served," the process server said, not unkindly, and walked back to his gray Corolla like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in my chest. I stood on that porch for a long time after his taillights disappeared down Larkspur, the document still open in my hands, the wind pulling at the corners of the pages like it wanted to read it too. Somewhere behind me, inside the house that legally belonged to me, and only me, I could hear the television still running in the den, Blake's game, gunfire and cheering, muffled through glass. Nobody inside had any idea what had just landed on the porch, and for a second I almost laughed. The wrong kind of laugh, the kind that comes right before you cry. I want to back up, because if you're just finding this now, here's the short version. My mother died when I was 8. My grandparents raised me in this house on East Larkspur, a 4-bedroom place in Denver with a garden Harold built with his own hands and a kitchen Elise filled with the smell of simmering broth. When they passed, they left the house to me, quietly, legally, years before my father married a woman named Selena, who moved in with 2 kids, Blake and Luna, and decided I was the household's unpaid staff. 2 weeks before that knock on the door, I'd found the deed in an old cedar chest, played Selena a recording of her own voice plotting to ship me off to college so she could keep the house, and handed her an eviction notice with a 2-week deadline stamped across the top. That deadline was 6 days away now, and somehow I was the one holding a restraining order. I hadn't actually moved out yet, not officially. I'd been splitting my nights between the house and Marilyn's spare room since the night of the confrontation, mostly because I didn't trust what might happen to Elise's china or Harold's old tool chest if nobody with a stake in protecting them was around. I kept a small spiral notebook in my bag those 2 weeks, the kind you'd use for grocery lists, and every night before bed I wrote down what had happened that day with a timestamp next to it. Marilyn had suggested it actually, the second night I stayed with her. "Memory is a liar under stress," she'd said, sliding the notebook across the table like a prescription. "Write it down while it's still true." I didn't know yet how much that habit would matter. I just knew my hands needed something to do besides shake. I called my attorney before I even finished reading the second page. His name was Daniel Ortega, a probate and property lawyer with 14 years of practice, a guy Marilyn had recommended because he'd handled her own mother's estate without charging her for every phone call like most lawyers do. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he already knew something was wrong. "Aurora, don't panic yet," he said. "Read me the case number." I read it. I heard him typing. "Okay, this is a temporary emergency protective order. She's alleging you threatened her with physical harm during a confrontation on the 11th. A pause. Does that match anything that actually happened?" I told her she had 2 weeks to leave my house, I said. "That's it. I didn't touch her. I didn't even raise my voice." "I believe you," he said, and something in the way he said it, flat and certain, like he'd heard this exact story 100 times, made my throat tighten in a way I didn't expect. "This is a tactic. It's called judicial leverage. If she can get a protective order against you, she can argue you're the unsafe one, and unsafe people don't get to enforce evictions. It buys her time, and it looks good in front of a judge who doesn't know either of you yet. So it's working. It's a delay, not a win. But we need to be in front of a judge fast, and we need to be ready." He exhaled, and I heard papers shuffling on his end. "There's a hearing date attached. Read me that too." 6 days. The same 6 days I had left before her actual eviction deadline. Whoever had drafted this for her, and I would find out soon enough that someone had timed it perfectly. If the protective order held even temporarily, I could be barred from my own house while the woman I was evicting stayed inside it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at Marilyn's kitchen table, the one with the chipped blue tile she never got around to fixing, and I read the order over and over until the words stopped meaning anything. Marilyn made chamomile tea I didn't drink and sat with me anyway, her reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, not saying much, just being there the way she'd been there since the day I found that envelope with my grandmother's handwriting on it. "She's not stupid," Marilyn finally said. "Scared people improvise. This woman planned." I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right, and it kept me up even later than the fear had. The next morning I went to work anyway, because rent, even temporary rent at Marilyn's, doesn't pay itself, and because staying still felt more dangerous than moving. I was 3 hours into my shift at the cafe on Colfax, steaming milk, when my manager, A guy named Gary, who mostly left me alone, waved me over with a strange look on his face. "Someone's asking for you," he said. "Says she's your sister." "I don't have a sister." I knew exactly who it was before I even turned around. Luna was standing by the pastry case in a cropped jacket, phone already raised, already recording, the little red dot blinking like a warning light. "Just want to hear your side," she said, loud enough for the whole cafe to catch it. "Since you're throwing a disabled kid out on the street, Blake doesn't have a disability." I don't know where that detail came from, except that I'd learned later Luna had posted a caption 3 days earlier calling her brother special needs to a home renovation, a phrase she'd apparently decided sounded better than the truth, which was that he'd flunked out of community college twice and refused to get a job. I didn't answer her. I turned around and kept steaming milk with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and she got 20 more seconds of footage of my back before Gary asked her to leave. That clip, cropped to make it look like I was hiding from a grieving little sister, went up on her account that night with the caption, "She won't even look at us." By the time I saw it, it had 11,000 views. By the next morning, it had 90,000. And the comments were a wall of strangers calling me a monster with a straight face, using my first name like they'd known me their whole lives. I told myself it didn't matter. Strangers on the internet don't pay my mortgage, don't sign my deed, don't know Harold's name or Elise's laugh or the 11 months I spent doing Blake's laundry while he played video games 4 feet away. I told myself none of it was real. Then someone found the cafe's public reviews page and started leaving 1-star ratings with my name in them. Gary called me into the back office on my next shift. Apologetic, stressed, a manager caught in something that had nothing to do with him. "I'm not saying it's fair," he said, "but corporate flagged the account. Can you maybe take a few days?" That was the moment the rationalizing stopped working. This wasn't going away on its own. It got worse before I even had time to process the reviews. 2 days later, a man called the house phone, the landline my grandparents had kept for 30 years and that I'd never bothered to disconnect, and asked to speak with the owner about a ring he'd taken in on consignment. I almost hung up thinking it was a scam until he described it. Rose gold, a small sapphire, an inscription on the inside band that read H&E 1974, my grandmother's engagement ring. The one I hadn't seen since the week Selena reorganized the bedroom closets and told me she'd tidied some of the old jewelry into storage. The pawnbroker, a soft-spoken older man who ran a shop off Federal Boulevard, said a woman matching Selena's description had brought in 3 pieces the week before, and that something about the engraving had bothered him enough to look up the address stamped on an old insurance appraisal tucked in the same velvet box. He hadn't paid out yet. He said it plainly, like it was obvious. Something felt off. Wife stuff usually isn't wrapped in appraisal paper from 1998. I drove there before my shift, hands cold on the wheel the whole way, half convinced I'd get there and find the ring already gone, sold to fund whatever this fight was costing Selena in legal fees. It was still in the case when I walked in, sitting under glass like it hadn't just spent 13 years on my grandmother's hand and 40 minutes as collateral in a stranger's shop. I had to produce 3 different documents before he'd release it back to me without a police report, and even then I ended up filing one anyway, because Daniel told me over the phone that theft of personal property, on top of everything else, was one more thread the judge would want to see pulled tight. I sat in my car afterward with the ring in my closed fist, and that was the first time in 2 weeks I let myself really cry. Not from fear, but from something closer to grief. The specific kind that comes from realizing a person you once trusted at your family's table had been quietly stripping it for parts the entire time nobody was looking. I called Daniel Ortega again that afternoon, and this time there was someone new on the line with him, a paralegal named Renata Diaz. Sharp-voiced, the kind of person who talks fast because her brain runs faster than her mouth can keep up. "I want to run something by you," Renata said. When Daniel told me the name Selena Marsh, something itched. So I pulled records. Court records are public if you know where to look, and I know where to look. Marsh isn't her married name, I said. She's Selena Ford now. My dad's name. Right, but before your father, before this house, she was Selena Marsh, and 11 years ago in Scottsdale, Arizona, a 19-year-old named Priya Anand filed a civil complaint against her. Renata's voice had that clipped, careful cadence of someone reading directly off a screen. Priya's father died, left the family home to Priya in trust. Selena was engaged to Priya's uncle at the time, moved into that house, and within a year was charging Priya $1,100 a month in rent for a property Priya legally owned. When Priya pushed back, Selena filed a restraining order against her too. Nearly identical language to yours. I sat down hard on Marilyn's porch step, phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark. Did Priya win? I asked. Case was dismissed for lack of evidence on the restraining order after 90 days, but by then, Priya had already left the state. Never got the house back. Selena was gone before the trust could sort itself out. Case was dismissed for lack of evidence on the restraining order after 90 days, but by then, Priya had already left the state. Never got the house back. Selena was gone before the trust could sort itself out, sold what she could liquidate, vanished from Arizona entirely. A pause. This isn't improvisation, Aurora. This is a playbook. She's run it before. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. The specific sick of realizing you weren't the target of a person losing control. You were a stop on a route she'd traveled before, with someone else's grief already used up on the last one. Daniel got back on the line. This changes the hearing, he said. This isn't just about your deed anymore. This is pattern evidence. I want it in front of Judge Nguyen. I hadn't even hung up with him when a Denver police cruiser pulled into the driveway I could see from Marilyn's front window, 2 blocks from the house itself, because Blake had apparently called it in from inside the house I technically still owned and he technically had no right to occupy. He'd told the dispatcher his gaming console and roughly $400 in headphones were missing, and that the last person in the house before they vanished was me. I met the responding officer, a patrol officer named Mia Torres, badge number visible, notepad already out, at the end of the driveway, rather than let her walk me back into a house that currently had an active restraining order attached to my name. She was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with the flat, unbothered patience of someone who has heard 100 domestic property disputes and stopped assuming either side was telling the whole truth. She asked me directly whether I'd been inside the house in the last 48 hours. I told her the truth, that I'd stopped by twice to collect mail and check on the pipes, both times for less than 10 minutes, both times with Marilyn waiting in the car outside. There's a Ring camera over the garage, I told her. It's on my account, not his. She had me pull the footage right there on my phone, time-stamped, unedited, easy enough to hand over that it clearly surprised her a little. It showed exactly what I'd said. Me at the mailbox at 6:12 the previous Tuesday, in and out in under 4 minutes. Nowhere near the den where Blake claimed the console had been sitting. Officer Torres looked at it twice, then looked at me for a long moment. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. This happens more than people think. Family fighting over a house. Somebody calls it in as theft because it's faster than a lawyer. She closed her notepad. I'm not filing this as founded. If he wants to push it, that's between him and the DA, but I wouldn't bet on it going anywhere. It didn't. But it cost me an afternoon, a headache that lasted into the next morning, and one more entry in the spiral notebook Marilyn had told me to keep. This one underlined twice. I want to tell you the next 4 days were quiet, but that would be a lie born out of how much I wish they had been. My father showed up at Marilyn's unannounced on the second night, standing on the porch in his work jacket looking smaller than I remembered him being, which was strange because nothing about his height had changed. Can we talk? He said. Not really a question. I let him in. Marilyn made herself scarce in the back room, though I know she stayed close enough to hear. Selena wants to know if you dropped the restraining order countersuit, he said. If you drop it, she'll drop the emergency motion, and this can end quieter. For everyone. Dad, she filed a false report against me. I know how it looks. It's not how it looks. It's what it is. I kept my voice level, which took more effort than I let show. Do you know what she did in Arizona? His face did something complicated, a flicker of surprise that told me he hadn't known, followed almost immediately by a kind of exhausted resignation that told me some part of him wasn't shocked either. He sat down at Marilyn's table without being asked, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. I met her 4 months after your mother's memorial, he said quietly. I wasn't looking for anyone. She just kept showing up. Casseroles, rides to the hardware store. I thought I was getting lucky, finding someone who wanted to take care of a broken family. He rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't check anything. I didn't want to. Grief makes you stupid, Aurora. It makes you grateful for the wrong things. That's not an excuse for 6 years of watching her work me like hired help. No, he said. It's not. We sat there a long time in silence, the kind that isn't comfortable but isn't hostile either. Just heavy, 2 people finally standing in the same true thing at the same time. Before he left, he told me he wasn't going home that night. He said it like a confession. And in a way it was. He slept in his truck outside a motel on Federal Boulevard rather than walk back into that house. And I didn't find out until later that Selena had already changed the code on the garage door, like she was the one who owned the place. The night before the hearing, Daniel called at 9:40 p.m. and told me Selena's attorney had filed a last-minute continuance request, trying to push the hearing back another 3 weeks, citing the need to properly respond to the Arizona evidence. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. 3 weeks meant 3 more weeks of restrictions on my own house. 3 more weeks of Selena inside it, spending down whatever equity or goodwill was left, maybe finding a buyer for something else that wasn't hers to sell. Can they do that? I asked, already pacing Marilyn's kitchen in sock feet, phone pressed hard enough to my ear that it ached. They can ask, Daniel said. Whether Judge Nguyen grants it is a different question. I'm filing an opposition tonight. I need everything organized and copied in triplicate by 7 a.m., every exhibit tabbed, every timestamp verified. Can you be at my office by 6? I was there at 5:50, Marilyn's coffee thermos in one hand and the spiral notebook in the other, and Renata was already there too, sleeves pushed up, a printer running continuously in the back room. We worked in near silence for an hour, matching dates on my notebook against the ring footage timestamps, against Officer Torres's incident number, against Priya Anand's notarized statement, building a single timeline so tight that a continuance would look, in Daniel's words, less like fairness and more like a stall tactic with a law degree attached. My hands wouldn't stop shaking the entire time, not from fear exactly, more like static that had nowhere left to go. Twice I dropped a stack of papers and had to reorder them by the timestamp in the corner. Twice Renata reordered them faster than I could, saying nothing. Just working. At 6:58, Daniel's assistant emailed the opposition to the court's e-filing portal with 4 minutes to spare, and I want to be honest, I threw up right after, quietly, in the office bathroom, gripping the sink with both hands like it might stop the room from tilting. I washed my face, put on the navy blazer Marilyn had insisted on buying me 2 days earlier because, in her words, judges believe people who dress like they believe themselves, and rode with Daniel downtown, the two of us barely speaking, watching the same 9 blocks of Denver traffic crawl past the window. The hearing was set for 9 in the morning at the Denver County Courthouse on Bannock Street. Judge Patricia Nguyen had a reputation, Daniel told me in the hallway outside Courtroom 4C, for moving fast and hating theater. Don't perform, he said. Just answer. He also told me, almost as an afterthought while we waited for the doors to open, that the continuance request would be the very first thing decided before anything else on the docket that morning even got read into the record. Judge Nguyen took the bench at 9:04, reviewed both filings for what felt like an unbearable 4 minutes of total silence in a packed courtroom, and denied the continuance without asking either attorney to argue it out loud. Counsel had adequate notice, she said, barely looking up. We proceed today. Selena's attorney didn't so much as blink, but Selena's jaw tightened in a way I recognized from 100 mornings in my own kitchen, the look she got right before she decided to redirect the blame onto someone smaller than herself. Selena arrived with an attorney I didn't recognize, a tall man in an expensive suit who barely looked at her, the posture of someone being paid by the hour and not particularly invested in the outcome. She wore cream, soft and maternal, her hair down instead of the sleek bun I was used to. She'd dressed for sympathy. It almost worked, right up until Daniel stood up. He was clean about it. No dramatics, no raised voice. He laid the original deed transfer on the exhibit table, notarized, dated 4 years before Selena had ever met my father, alongside a letter from Harold and Elise's longtime physician, Dr. Marcus Feld, confirming both were of sound mind and full legal capacity at the time of the transfer, obtained specifically because Daniel had anticipated an undue influence argument and wanted it dead before it was born. Then he introduced Exhibit D, the audio recording, the one where Selena's own voice discussed shipping me off to keep the house, already familiar to me, but hearing it played through courtroom speakers made my stomach fold in on itself all over again. Then he called Renata to the stand. Objection? Relevance? Selena's attorney said, sounding bored, even objecting, goes to pattern and credibility of the emergency motion, Your Honor, Daniel replied, requesting the court's indulgence. Judge Nguyen studied Selena for a long moment over her glasses, an expression I couldn't read, and then nodded once. I'll allow it. Briefly, Renata laid out Arizona in 6 clean minutes. The Scottsdale property. Priya Anand, now 29, whom Renata had actually managed to reach by phone 2 nights earlier, and who had signed a sworn statement, notarized, express-mailed, that Daniel entered as Exhibit F. I watched Selena's face while it was read aloud. I'd seen her smile falter before, in my own kitchen, in my own hallway, but I had never seen it do what it did in that courtroom, which was collapse entirely, all at once, like a building whose foundation had finally given out after years of quiet cracks. That was a different situation, Selena said too loudly, before her own attorney could stop her. That family lied about me. Ms. Ford, Judge Nguyen said, not unkindly, but with a precision that landed harder than shouting would have. You'll have your opportunity to respond through counsel. This court does not appreciate outbursts. But the outburst had already told the room everything it needed to know. Daniel wasn't finished. He entered the police report from the pawn shop, along with a photograph of the appraisal paper still folded around Elise's ring, and a short statement from the shop owner, confirming the date and description of the pieces brought in. He didn't dwell on it. 2 sentences, maybe 3, letting the judge connect what it meant on her own. A woman fighting in court to stay in a house she claimed to be entitled to had in the same week been quietly selling off what didn't belong to her either. Selena's attorney finally leaned over and said something to her under his breath. She didn't respond to him. She was staring at the folded appraisal paper like she hadn't expected to see it again. It took the judge 11 minutes to rule. The emergency protective order against me was dissolved, dismissed with a finding that the underlying allegation lacked credible support. Judge Nguyen went further than I expected, noting for the record that the timing and content of the petition suggested it may have been filed to obstruct a separate and lawful eviction proceeding, and referred the matter to the district attorney's civil fraud unit for review. My eviction notice, the one I'd handed Selena in my own dining room 6 days earlier, was upheld in full, with the court setting a hard compliance date and authorizing the Denver County Sheriff's civil unit to enforce removal if Selena hadn't vacated by then. I didn't cry in the courtroom. I saved that for the parking garage, sitting in Marilyn's Honda Civic with the engine off, both hands pressed against my eyes, shaking in a way that had nothing left to do with fear. The compliance deadline came 4 days later. I stood across the street from the house that morning, arms crossed against the October cold, and watched Deputy Ray Contreras of the Denver County Sheriff's Civil Enforcement Unit walk up the same porch steps where I'd once been handed a restraining order that wasn't mine to deserve. Selena had 2 moving boxes packed and the rest of her belongings still scattered through rooms that weren't hers, and I watched Deputy Contreras explain, patient and procedural, that the court order didn't leave room for negotiation today. Blake carried out his gaming setup piece by piece, jaw tight, refusing to look at me even once. He never did get charged over the false theft report he'd filed against me 2 weeks earlier, the one that had briefly made me a suspect in my own home, until Officer Mia Torres pulled the Ring doorbell footage and found nothing but me carrying my own laundry basket at the exact time he claimed I'd stolen his console. But word travels, and word had traveled to the community college he'd been threatening to reapply to, and the last I heard from a mutual acquaintance, that application had quietly stalled. Luna didn't film that morning. That, more than anything, told me how far things had actually turned. 3 days after the hearing, a reporter named Josh Whitcomb from a local Denver outlet had run a short piece on the courthouse filing. Not sensational, just factual, laying out the timeline, the Arizona parallel, the DA referral. It got picked up and shared into the same local groups where Luna's original video had spread, and this time the comments underneath weren't calling me a monster. They were asking her account to explain itself. She deleted the original video 41 minutes after the article went semi-viral. She never posted an apology. I didn't expect one. My father helped Selena carry the last box to a rental car, silent, his face unreadable in a way that told me he was somewhere he'd never been before in 6 years of marriage, a place with no more excuses left in it. He didn't go with her. He told me later, standing on the sidewalk after she'd driven off, that he'd already met with his own attorney about filing for divorce, that he couldn't undo what he hadn't protected me from, but he could stop pretending he hadn't seen it. I didn't forgive him that day. I'm not sure forgiveness works on a deadline, and I wasn't going to force mine just because the house was finally quiet again. That evening, after the sheriff's report was filed and the last of Selena's belongings were gone, I walked through every room by myself. The kitchen still smelled faintly of whatever candle Selena had burned that morning, something with a name like driftwood vanilla that had nothing to do with the broth and rosemary I remembered. I opened every window anyway, even in the cold, and let October air move through the house the way it used to when Elise would fling the curtains open and declare the place needed to breathe. Marilyn moved a few of her things into the spare room the following week. Not permanently, she said, just until I got used to the quiet, though we both knew that was only half the reason. We repainted the kitchen the pale yellow Elise had always wanted and never gotten around to. I found Harold's gardening gloves in a box in the garage that Selena had apparently never bothered to throw out, cracked leather, stiff with age, and I put them on the mantle where I could see them every day. I wear my grandmother's ring on a chain now instead of putting it back in a box. Not because I'm precious about it, but because I want to feel it against my sternum on the ordinary days, the grocery store days, the double shift days, the days nothing dramatic happens at all. It reminds me those are the days that actually count. 6 years of chores and highlighted bills had trained me to expect a crisis behind every quiet moment. It takes longer than I expected to unlearn that. I'm still unlearning it. Blake reached out once. A single text about 3 weeks after the move-out, asking if I still had a toolbox of his in the garage. I did. I left it on the porch on a Tuesday afternoon and didn't wait around to see him pick it up. That was the last either of us said to the other. I don't know what he tells people now about why he had to leave that house. I've stopped wondering. It's been 3 months now. My father calls every Sunday. Some Sundays I answer with more warmth than others, and he's learned not to push past whatever I have to give that week. He's renting a 1-bedroom near his job, going to therapy for the first time in his life, with a counselor named Dr. Lena Whitfield, who apparently spends most of every session, according to him, walking him backward through every moment he chose comfort over protecting his own daughter. I hope it helps him. I hope it changes something. I'm not responsible for finding out either way. The Arizona case against Selena is apparently still being reviewed by the DA's civil fraud unit, and Renata tells me these things move slow. Sometimes nothing ever comes of them. Sometimes they take years. Priya Anand emailed me once, a short message through Daniel's office. No return address, Nothing dramatic, just 5 lines saying she was glad someone had finally stopped it and that she hoped I never had to spend 11 years wondering if anyone would believe me the way I'd apparently believed her. I read it 4 times before I could write anything back. I've made peace with not needing a bow on that part of the story. I got my house back. I got my name back. Everything after that is just paperwork moving through a system that doesn't owe me a schedule. Some nights I still catch myself checking over my shoulder in my own hallway, waiting for someone to hand me a chore list I never agreed to, or a bill with my name circled in yellow highlighter. Old fear doesn't leave just because the danger did. But most mornings now, I wake up in the room that used to be mine when I was 8 years old, and the light comes in through the window the way it always did, and for a few seconds before the day starts, the house is just quiet, and it's just mine, and nobody is waiting outside the door to tell me otherwise. If you made it this far, you've earned it. Some houses get stolen slow, one chore, one excuse, one silence at a time. Mine got taken back the same way.